tomorrow I'll be taking this thing out on the range, and before I do that, I want to get this thing all cleaned up. I don't ever want to fire a gun without having made sure that the chamber, the barrel, it's all free of any garbage that might be in there, anything that they might have picked up from the factory, little bits of metal, sometimes just the oil itself or cosmoline or something can create a high pressure system where a gun can actually blow up, from what I've heard anyway. And I also want to make sure that everything is lubricated correctly so that it's running really smoothly tomorrow and I can give it a good review. I'm going to start by scrubbing out the bore with a little bit of Hoppy's number 9, and I keep it in these jars or jelly jars just because they tend to have a better seal than the original jars they come in. Once you've opened one of those, they tend not to hold their fluids anymore. So I'm just going to use a bore brush, and this is one of the floating kind. So as it's going down the bore, it can spin with the rifling inside there. You really don't want to use one that is one of the fixed brushes that just pushes straight through. You want one that can kind of spin to match what's going on in the barrel. I'm going to run a patch down here with some more of that Hoppy's number 9. Ooh, look at that. I'm guessing this has been fired at the factory once at least, but I'm seeing some tiny little metal fragments in there, so it's just nice to start getting this thing cleaned out a bit. On these patches, I like to alternate a wet one and a dry one. Okay, so things are coming out pretty clean here. Just to make sure that I have all the fouling and any debris from the factory worked out of the rifling, I'm going to go ahead and scrub this through a couple more times. Got a little bit more powder residue, but it's looking pretty good. It's actually looking pretty clean. Now I'm going to run a patch with some Hoppy's number 9 through the cylinders. So I've picked up a little powder residue or whatever else junk may be in there. And now I'll just get the solvent out with a clean one. So what about points of lubrication? It looks like this has come pretty well lubed from the factory. There's actually a pretty good sheen of oil across all the surfaces, and I can see where there's some buildup in some of these little mechanical moving areas. But just to be sure, I'm going to go ahead and oil some of the main points that I want. Anything that has high wear, anything that moves, you want to oil. So I'm going to start here with the cylinder. I'm going to put a little oil on this rod. Let that work in. And the oil that I applied there should run all the way down through to here. It's a pretty penetrating oil, so it should move around pretty good. We have some other moving parts right down in here. Just put a drop of oil on that. Put a drop on the cylinder release button, kind of down in that crack, and that'll work in as I move this around. I'll pull the hammer back. Drop a little oil down into where I know that pin is. And I'm going to go ahead and put some in here. at the trigger hinge down in there. That's feeling pretty good. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the excess oil that kind of spilled out from the oil drops that I placed on here. I'm going to grab up some of that with one of these patches, and I'll probably just put a little extra on here too, just like a drop or so on the patch, and then just go over the entire gun, getting a nice light coat of oil over all of the metal surfaces. There's actually a really good reason for putting a light sheen of oil all over the gun. Any of the blued metal parts, especially any place where the blue is wearing off, you want just the littlest bit of oil covering all of that, because even though this bluing is there as kind of a rust preventative, it doesn't always do the job. I've seen a rifle that a solvent had been applied to it to clean it up, and it turned out that it was one that destroys oil. It was like I guess it had mineral spirits or acetone, I don't know what was in it, but afterward that gun was left to sit outside on a humid day, and when the temperature dropped, water condensed all over it, and within an hour it was quite rusted. So that's a good little word of warning there. If you want to keep your guns looking good, keep them oiled just a little bit. And actually, after coating all the surfaces here with oil, I'm going to go back over with a clean patch and just take off some of it, because this might be a little bit excessive. So I'll just take a clean, dry one here and start removing some of the oil on the outside. The very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run just a little bit of oil down the barrel. And in the cylinder chambers. Just like what I did with the outside of the gun, I don't want there to be a thick coating of oil inside the barrel here, and I don't want there to be anything in the chambers inside the cylinder. So I'm going to run a dry patch through, and that's not going to get rid of the oil in there, it's just going to reduce it to a very, very thin coating over everything. And with that, this should be ready to rock. Everything's feeling pretty good. I'll see you out on the range.